formats which you'll go ahead and see are Asian parliamentary debating or British parliamentary debating. First, we'll focus on Asian parliamentary debating. Later on, we'll move on to the British parliamentary debating format. But yeah, that's for starters. How do we want you to all to go ahead and interact with us, ask questions, stuff like that? So there are three ways. First is simply go ahead and use the chat option. Feel free to text anything. If you have any doubts, we'll go ahead and respond accordingly. Second is just the raise hand option. You can go ahead and use that feature. We'll just take your name. You can go ahead and voice your doubts. Third, and this is something we'll try to do, but most likely we'll forget, is that we'll stop after each slide and we'll take up questions. So in case we don't stop, feel free to use the first two options which I've just talked about. But yeah, like I said, for people who weren't here beforehand, a huge part of debating revolves around you speaking or being comfortable with the idea of speaking or voicing out your opinions, stuff like that. So I think it's a good practice to develop, which is start from the very beginning. Keep your cameras on. If you have any doubts, like feel free to switch on your mics and voice those out so that this session can be like an interactive session. So yeah, with that out of the way, we can start with the next slide. Okay, so this is slide 0. This is not necessarily related to like Asian parliamentary debating. This is just about debating in general. These are three fundamental things which you all should keep in mind for pretty much your entire tenure as debaters. So the first thing is just this, which is you all are new to this, so pay attention and learn. Why do we say you all? And this is kind of important. It's because we have different people from different backgrounds. A lot of you might have done youth parliaments, a lot of you might have done MUNs or conventional debates or inter-house debates, district level debates, stuff like that. Parliamentary debating is something which is completely new. So I'm just going to say something which our seniors said to us and super seniors said to them. These are really harsh and blunt words, but this is just information, which is we don't care if you've done 5 MUNs or 50 MUNs. You all have to go ahead and pay attention and learn. So don't take it in this way that just because I've done XYZ MUNs or I have whatever like background experience, I just need to go ahead and fill in the gaps and you already know some of it. That's unlikely to be the case till the time you all have probably done parliamentary debating in school. Even then, school teaches you very different things in comparison to what we'll teach you. So we don't want to discredit your hard work. Our point is just simple, which is we want you all to look at this as a clean slate opportunities. So for people who have had some experience, we have those people in our tenure too, and they can go ahead and vouch for this, that previous experience doesn't necessarily help you in parliamentary debating because you don't win debates by facts. We'll cover all of that later. But yeah, this is all new. But secondarily and more importantly, the people who don't have any experience, most of us didn't have any experience before college. We all learned everything through all of these training sessions as well, and we fared well, so to say the least. But yeah, okay, don't want to brag about ourselves, but yeah, that's the first point. So that's why we want you all to pay attention and be open to the idea of learning something which is really new. Second is keep an open mind. The reason why this is important is because a part of you all who wants to join DevSop would want to join it because you want to voice out your opinions, whatever you feel, stuff like that. Partially that is correct, which is you all would of course have the opportunity to voice out your opinions, feelings, whatever you feel. But a lot of the times you'll be asked to go ahead and debate on things which you usually don't go ahead and relate to. So for example, I give you like the motion, this house supports capitalism. If this is the motion, and my personal biases and opinions are in a way where I don't support capitalism, I oppose it, and I have reasons, I have my own personal beliefs and biases for that. But still I have to debate that motion if I am from the side government, or if I basically am the side proposition, or basically if I have to defend that motion. So that's why we want you all to keep an open mind, because you're going to be required to defend stances you personally don't, your personal preferences might not necessarily align with. So, and just in general in life, it's good to have an open mind. It helps you have balanced thoughts in and of itself and look at things with a more neutral perspective. Third, it's a cliche, but hard work and consistency are key. The reason why we selected all of you is because we see a lot of potential in all of you, and we think that you all would make really good and successful debaters, and that you all would learn a lot. But that's what we see. We see potential for it to actualize into other things as well. For instance, for you to learn more, etc., you all need to work hard. So this probably looks like us going ahead in our first year, speaking to seniors, debating quite often, doing a lot of mocks, i.e., practices, asking seniors for extensive feedback, ways we can improve. But more importantly, consistency. The reason why consistency is important is because it doesn't really matter a lot if you're just active for the first week of DevSoc and then you aren't active, because we'll have continuous activities, continuous sessions, and continuous ways, pathways for you all to improve upon. Because of that, we need you all to stay consistent with the activity. If you will not stay consistent, then when you will come back, you will be rusty, and you will probably feel that you're kind of at the back end when it comes to you going ahead and debating and stuff like that. So we want you all to stay consistent, and we are always there for you to ensure that you have a good and a great journey. But we want you all to go ahead and put in the effort for that by being consistent. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is where we come to basics of debating. These are some of the terms you will come across. I want to first explain those. First is topic. So every debates happen on a topic, but from now and onwards, we'll refer to that as a motion. So we'll not call it topic, we'll not call it agenda, we'll call it a motion. That's the word you will now be using, and you'll go ahead and hear that quite a lot. So a lot of the motions start with the words this house. Examples of that looks like this house would ban drugs, or this house believes that long distance relationships do more harm than good to people who enter into them. So before I get into what does this house means, the second point is important to be explained, which is within a debate, you have two sides, which is the side which is for the motion, i.e., which is going to like defend the motion, i.e., side government, and the side which is against the motion, i.e., against the topic, which is side opposition. So this basically means that in a motion, this house would ban drugs. There's going to be one side which is going to explain or basically be in favor of banning drugs, which is side government, and there's going to be one side which is not going to be in favor of banning drugs, which is going to be side opposition. Now, within one side, you have one team on government and one team on opposition. Within that, you have three speakers per team. So, three speakers collectively form the team government, i.e., side government. Three people collectively form the side opposition. Now, all these six people combined form this house. So these are basically the six debaters within the room. There is an expectation that these people are going to make rational arguments, and they're going to go ahead and make those from a neutral point of view. Till the time, of course, the motion requires you to not make them from a neutral point of view, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, these are rational individuals, i.e., the six debaters within that room form this house. So then, if I were to just go ahead and elaborate more upon the two examples which are given in this motion, note that it's completely fine if you don't necessarily understand these right now, because we'll explain motion types in a completely different session. This is just to go ahead and get you all familiar with seeing the different types of motions which exist. So, first is this house would ban drugs. In a this house will or this house would debate, it's a policy debate, which basically means that you don't argue whether or not this law can pass through the parliament, which is to say you assume that the law is going to be passed through the parliament, and the government would have some form of resources in order to ensure that this ban can take place. So instead of debating whether or not this can and cannot happen, what you usually debate are the whether or not it should or shouldn't happen, in terms of why should the ban happen and why the ban should not happen. This can look like harms or benefits of the ban, etc. This brings me to the second motion, which is this house believes that long distance relationships do more harm than good to people who enter into them. So on-site government, i.e., the team which is for the motion, they have to go ahead and talk about, for instance, the benefits of harms of a long distance relationship and why there's more harm which exists. On side opposition, you go ahead and talk about the fact that no, there is some benefit which goes ahead and exists, and secondarily, the benefit is more than the harm in and of itself. So government and opposition teams will go ahead and bring in their respective harms and benefits, but you have to go ahead and evaluate which is more, i.e., is the harm more or is the benefit more. So yeah, that's what you have to prove. The third point is motions are equally contested. Now, what exactly do we mean by this? So, motions are usually set by AG cores. You will get to know who they are later. But basically, the people who make these motions, i.e., topics, are people who have thought through these in a quite deep way. They've gone ahead and they've gone ahead and evaluate the type of arguments which exist on both the sides, which is to say that a lot of the time, especially in the beginning, you will think that this has no gov or this has no op, or gov and op are short for side government and side opposition. We'll go ahead and use those short forms within this session or just in general. So yeah, you'll probably think that, or you'll think that the op is stronger than gov, or it's more gov leaning, i.e., gov is stronger than op. Note, in the reason why you're going ahead and feeling that is an outcome of lack of information and lack of experiences. So sometimes you might know more about side opposition, so you might feel that, oh, if I'm side government, it's this debate is something where the odds are stacked against me, I cannot win, stuff like that. So don't feel that way ever. The reason why those motions are set is because arguments exist on both the sides, on government and argue and opposition, and they can be equally contested, i.e., the motion can go either ways, i.e., opposition can also win because of the existence of arguments on opposition, and government can also win because of the existence of arguments on side government. So don't feel nervous when you get a debate that, oh, this has no gov. It surely has gov or government side arguments. You just have to go ahead and you will be able to better understand those arguments, and the lack of information, that disparity is going to go ahead and decrease the more you debate. Last is how there's no right or wrong. This is simple, which is to say, everyone has their own opinions and biases. So, for instance, if I look at the first motion, this house would ban drugs. There's nothing inherently right or wrong about this. So, motions are usually made about topics which are being talked about within the world also in and of itself. So, you have people who discuss these in real world. So, there isn't an inherent right or wrong when it comes to these motions. You might have certain opinions or biases which go ahead and make you believe that only one side is wrong or right, or you have certain opinions due to which you think only one thing is wrong or right. Because imagine if only side government of it would have been correct, i.e., an objective truth that only banning drugs is the right thing to do, then why would this even be debated? There, because then there would be no opposition to it. So that's the whole idea. You have to question everything. There is no objective right or wrong when it comes to debating. Both sides can be like both sides are equally therefore contested, and therefore there isn't necessarily a right or wrong which exists. Next slide. Actually, you know what? I'll take up questions first, and I'll get a sip of water, and then we'll proceed. If any of you have any questions, feel free to unmute, use the chat box. We'll wait for 10 seconds. If you want me to repeat something, I can do that as well. Okay, great. We'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about debates, but what exactly happens? How does a debate progress? And this is where I want you all to actually visualize what I'm trying to say. I'll describe like what an offline debate or even like an online debate looks like. What exactly happens? What is the chronology or the order in which things go ahead and take place? First is that you are told the side you have to go ahead and defend, i.e., if you're side government or side opposition, which again, tying it back to what was explained, where are you for, i.e., do you support the motion, or are you against, i.e., you oppose the motion? So the first thing you're going to be told is what exactly is it that your team has to do in terms of supporting, i.e., side government, or opposing, i.e., side opposition. What exactly are you? Note the way this is decided can be through two ways. First, there is an online software which is like online software which goes ahead and allocates these randomly. Or second, this can be through a toss. But thing which is seen the most often is through a software. So don't think that the odds are stacked against me and I got the difficult side, or if you have biases towards one side, or I think I do better in op, but someone is doing something to give me government. That doesn't happen. These are randomized and these are done by a software. So that's the first thing which takes place. Second is motions announcement. So, motion announcement. So, for instance, if there are 20 teams in a tournament, and this is where I'd like you all to visualize, that means you have 20 teams where each team has three people each, right? That basically means that two teams have to go against each other. That means in totality, you'll have 10 rooms, where in one each particular room you will have side government and side opposition, i.e., in totality, you will have 10 side governments and 10 side oppositions. All 10 of these debates are going to take place simultaneously at the same time. So, for instance, in 10 different classrooms, 10 different debates would be taking place, where there are 10 different governments in each individual room and 10 different side oppositions in each individual room. So that's what takes place. But before you all go ahead and debate, what happens is that everyone is collected in one particular area where motions are announced. So this basically goes ahead and looks like three motions being released, i.e., three topics being released, not one but three. Post that, you have to do rankings. So now let's go ahead and like focus on one particular room. For example, Abhimanyu and Publin, you all are side government, and you have Ananya and Arti on side opposition. What happens then is that rankings takes place. So you are given three motions, but you just have to debate on one of them. How do you go ahead and narrow it down to that one particular motion? That's something which is a simple process which we'll teach later on. But in short, it takes place like, for instance, you have to go ahead, and Ananya does not want to debate the third motion, so she can veto that. On side government, for instance, one person doesn't want to debate the first motion, so first gets crossed out, third gets crossed out, and you end up doing motion two, something like that. There can be other circumstances too, but this is just in short. You basically two teams collectively within one room, i.e., government and opposition, narrow it down to one motion. Once that is done, a prep time of 25 minutes starts. Now, I want to go ahead and talk about a couple of things in terms of prep time. What do we exactly mean by that? So, for instance, if Pobali, Abhimanyu, and all, you all are one team, and let's take me, right? Like the three of us are one team. What happens then is that we'll go ahead and do our prep. What happens is that there's no internet usage which is allowed. You cannot reach out to any fourth person through WhatsApp, text, etc. So it's just the three of us and our brains. That's it. So we'll have to go ahead and think of arguments, etc., to go ahead and debate within that round. So this ties it back to the hard work consistency thing which I was talking about, because the way we'd like to say things is this, that the prep is not just 25 minutes. In reality, it's your daily activities and your daily habits. So if you read more, you're consistent with debating, whatever materials we are sending you, you consume those actively, you're making notes, all of those things add to your prep. Because if you don't have internet, your prep might look like empty, or like a lot of just like waste of time because you don't know arguments and stuff. Again, this does not mean learning facts by any means. This just means whatever your daily habits look like, and we'll shape those by sending resources. Be consistent with those so that you can go ahead and have a better prep, you can go ahead and make better arguments, etc., within that prep. What exactly are these arguments, etc., all of this we'll cover later on. But yeah, you go ahead and have prep. So a lot of the times people say, what if I don't know anything about the topic? So that's the benefit of having three people. So for instance, I know a lot about economics, someone else might know a lot about sports, and someone else might know a lot about pop culture or Bollywood, etc. You have motions on all of these topics, or themes, by the way. If that happens, it's the three people. So collectively, even if one person doesn't know a lot, you still have others who know a lot and they can help you with that prep, which is why three people are necessary. And that's why a lot of the things we talked about in terms of prep going smoothly, stuff like that, that can be helped by three people being there instead of just one person. Okay, then, what happens once you're done with your prep time? How do debates actually proceed? So, there are six speeches, and each of those six speeches is going to be 7 minutes long. Then, followed by that, you have two speeches. Each of those two speeches is going to be 4 minutes long. So the order in which it proceeds is that you have three people on side government, you have three people on opposition. We'll come to speaker roles and sequence later, but one person from government speaks, then the one person from opposition speaks, second person from government speaks, second person from opposition speaks, third person from government speaks, third person from opposition speaks. By that time, you're done with the first half of what I just said, which is 6 minutes, six speeches of 7 minutes each. Post that, you have reply speeches. Post the third speech of opposition, you don't have government reply, you have opposition reply instead. We'll come to the order, we'll show all of that to you later. But that speech is going to be a 4 minute speech, and the last speech is going to be the government reply speech, which is again going to be 4 minutes long. 15-second grace period basically means that adjudicators, i.e., judges, are not going to note anything beyond 7 minutes 15 seconds. So, if you're just about to end at 6 minutes 59 seconds, etc., just to wind up what you're saying, complete your sentences, you get addition of 15 seconds grace period. What usually happens post that is in an offline setup, there are people who start slightly tapping the desk or they start clicking, indication that your time has stopped, completed, so please end it. So just a note for all of you, that's what 15 seconds grace period means. It means it gives you time to just wind up, end your sentence, stuff like that. Okay, coming on to adjudication. What exactly is it? The debate is over, but what happens is that the judge or someone has to tell you which side won, government won or opposition won. That person or people who do that are referred to as adjudicators. That simply means judges, but from now and onwards, we'll call all judges adjudicators. That's the nomenclature you use in debating. So, how do they go ahead and judge your debates? We'll have one whole session on that. But in short, note you will not be judged on things like vocabulary or using fancy words or how good your English is or how are you fluent or are you fumbling or stammering. You will never be judged on any of those bases. The simple basis on which you'll be judged upon is your argument. So, for instance, side government had argument A that we should ban drugs because of this argument, and side opposition had argument B, which is we should not ban drugs because of this reason. Judge is simply going to tell you that I was able to go ahead and credit argument B over argument A because of one, two, three reasons, which is why side opposition wins, or the other way around. So they're simply going to go ahead and judge you on the basis of content and what came in your speeches, and why did one argument beat the other, or why did one team win over the other team, stuff like that. So that's the only thing which happens in an adjudication. There can be multiple people who are judging you. So a lot of the times you have to hear three oral adjudication speeches. That's basically called an OA. So what do we mean by an OA? It's simple. Since you all as speakers gave speeches, the way judges explain their decision is through an oral adjudication, which basically stands for OA. So they give a 7 minute long OA as well, which basically explains which side won and why did they basically win. Okay, next slide. This is speaker roles. Okay, I'll come on to speaker roles right now. This basically just shows the sequence. So the first speech within the debate room after the 25 minutes of prep is the prime minister speech. This person is the first speaker from side government, which basically has to go ahead and speak in the favor or for the motion, basically. This is a 7 minute long speech where you can take a 15 seconds grace period. Second, after the prime minister is done, you have leader of opposition. This is the first person, i.e., first speaker from side opposition, i.e., the team which has to stand against or basically oppose the motion in and of itself. Post that, you will have deputy prime minister from side government. The deputy prime minister again has to support the motion. We'll come on to what respective speakers have to do, but yeah, that's also a 7 minute long speech. Then you have DLO. First is simply on the words government and opposition, and this is important. Government by any means does not have any other connotation like this is the government of India or the BJP government, and opposition means the opposition which is taking place within India, like Congress, etc. This has no connotation within like in regards to the political background of country India, etc. Till the time you are explicitly told to do so, but we'll come to that later. So as of right now, just note government means nothing except one thing, which is you just have to support the motion, i.e., stand in favor of the motion. Opposition means nothing except you having to oppose the motion, i.e., going ahead and standing against the motion. The same thing applies to all of the speaker role as well. Prime minister does not mean you're the prime minister of India. It has no meaning whatsoever except the fact that you're the first speaker of the team. That's it. Similarly, leader of opposition does not mean that you are some sort of like an opposition leader of India or USA or some other country. No, it simply means that you are the first speaker from side opposition. So, and thirdly, note that just because someone's going the leader of opposition or prime minister and you're going first, you're somehow the captain of the team or you're the most powerful speaker. None of these things apply. So it's a group activity. All speakers and speaker roles are equally important. So don't think that I got this role and this is more important, or I got whip speech and that's more important, or blah blah blah. So don't think of it that in that way at all. On to reply speeches and who does reply, because you all must be thinking that there are four speeches which exist on government but it's just three people. So the first two people, and on side government and on side opposition, are the people who do the reply speeches as well. So it's completely depends up to you all. So the prime minister can give government reply, deputy prime minister can also give the government reply. Similarly, leader of opposition or deputy leader of opposition, either of those two can give the opposition reply. Note that at all points in time, whip speakers do not give the reply speeches. So that's important for you all to note. So again, just a refresher, there are going to be three people within your team. Those are going to take the roles of prime minister, deputy prime minister, and government whip from side government, whereas the first two speakers, i.e., PM and DPM, either of those two can do reply speeches. Similar thing applies to opposition also, which is you have three speakers within your team. Each of those will give a 7 minute long constructive speech, LO, DLO, and op whip, and then at the end you will have op reply. Just a note here that a lot of the times you might go ahead and face difficulties with speaker roles, etc. Note that you can always come to us and we'll help you out, because these might seem like really long complicated names like, oh, deputy leader of opposition, or how would you actually remember these names or sequences, stuff like that. So we can assure you that by the end of the training sessions you will surely remember them, because we'll use these words and like terminologies quite often. But also secondarily, the more you will do mocks and stuff, you'll be able to better understand these things. But yeah, for now you can just go ahead and use this PPT as reference. We'll send it later as well. With that, I'm done with my end. I'll first take up questions, so we'll wait for a minute. If you all have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, chat box, all of those things work. If you've understood, you can let us know that as well so that we can proceed. Okay, great. Great, great, great. Yep, just a second. Okay, who will assign the speaker roles? Like, who will assign that this particular team will be opposition and other in government? Okay, so when it comes to deciding teams, and like a software goes ahead and allocates that. So, for instance, there are 20 teams which are participating in one tournament. The software will randomly allocate 10 teams as government and 10 teams as opposition. So, that's something you don't have to worry about. So within one particular team, if it comes to who assigns the speaker roles in particular, like who goes PM, who goes DPM, who goes government whip, we'll conduct a lot of mocks. We'll see which role fits which speaker the best, which role you yourself are comfortable with. We'll make teams accordingly. We'll help you find the speaker role which suits you the best. But yeah, when it comes to teams, i.e., which side gets government and opposition and tournaments, it's a software which usually decides that. Yep, if arguments from both sides get countered, who wins? That's exactly what happens. So both sides present their arguments. At the end of the day, which argument is more persuasive? That depends on a lot of things like responses, i.e., rebuttals, like weighing which is done, stuff like that. But we'll go ahead and teach you all of these things, i.e., arguments, how are they made? How do you decide if you are the judge? Then how do you decide which side wins, stuff like that? That depends on the persuasiveness of arguments and a lot of other factors. We'll go ahead and completely delve into those in other workshops as well. The fourth speech on both sides will be reply to various. Okay, one second. The fourth speech on both sides will be reply to various POI raised or a general conclusion. Yep. So, what exactly do you have to do in a reply speech, and what exactly are POIs are something which are going to be covered in the next slide. Can you can you explain arrows mentioned here, like who is going to speak up? Yep. Okay. So prime minister goes first, after that from the side government, after that you have leader of opposition, they speak on side opposition. Afterwards you have deputy prime minister, who is the second speaker from side government. After that comes the deputy leader of opposition, who is the second speaker from side opposition. Then you have government whip, who is the third speaker from side government. Then you have opposition whip, who is the third speaker from side opposition. These are constructive speeches, i.e., six speeches of 7 minutes each. After that, you have opposition reply speeches, which is going to take place after op whip. So here you are not alternating. You from opposition whip, you'll go to opposition reply, and then at the end you have government reply. Both the reply speeches are going to be 4 minutes long. Yep. Okay. How will we have preliminary prep regarding topics? Yep, we'll help you out with that. So you don't have to worry about prep. Okay, neutral mindset and biased opinion. So a lot of the times you will be, for instance, like I gave you an example, right? It's really important to have a neutral mindset, because if I'm biased in a way where I don't like capitalism, but I'm supposed to defend capitalism in a motion, then that means I'd have to let go of my biases, that I hate capitalism, etc. And I would have to come up with arguments to go ahead and support the like side government within that this house supports capitalism motion. So that's why it becomes really important for you all to let go of your biases and opinions within the debate. Because you would not be able to go ahead and debate properly if you can only debate certain sides of the motion and not both. Yep. Time to go ahead and ask questions, which is why judges end, even if it's a 7 minute timer, they end it in like 6 minutes. And respectfully ask them questions, but yeah, you cannot overturn the judgment. If they've given it to your team or the other team, that is the final decision. It cannot be overturned. You can for sure ask them questions related to their OA, i.e., oral adjudication, i.e., their explanation why which team won. Afterwards, you can also go ahead and reach out to judges for feedback, i.e., you can talk to them in terms of what you could have improved upon, things you could have incorporated, stuff like that. But yeah, the judge's decision is completely final. Okay. One second. Okay, you're the leader of opposition. Okay, so what happens is that you go ahead and discuss larger ideas in prep. The PM has spoken first. What exactly do you do in an LO speech is something we'll cover exactly in the next slide. We can't be here all 8 weeks around 2 months, so if things are flexible in that regard. Yep, okay, so we would, so when it comes to training sessions, there's just going to be 5 of them. So we'd want you all to go ahead and like attend those 5 sessions. Post that, when it comes to practice like mocks, etc., we will take your availability into consideration and we'll go ahead and help you all plan mocks accordingly. But yeah, I think I'll take up rest of the other questions at the very end. We'll now go ahead and proceed with the session.
Perfect. If somebody can just confirm if I'm audible and visible, both things. Cool. Uh, Perfect. So I think we can move on to the next slide. I think that's where we'll also be covering this part of the doubt as to what the LO can do. We'll be covering in detail what each speaker role looks like. So I think a couple of things first. I think now that we've gotten the order of how speaker roles necessarily go about, like first PM, then LO, what I'm going to explain is that what does each speaker largely do without going into like too much depth on each speaker. I'll give you an overview of what each speaker can do and what is the roles for each speaker assigned. So let's go side by side now that you know the order. For Prime Minister, and this is really important, right? And I'll go with like government first and then opposition. Simply because I think even though both PM and LO are first speeches, I think going about side by side now that you know the order will slightly be better in terms of understanding. I think note this that all three speeches from each side have to go ahead and get at the end of it construct one side of the argumentation. What does that mean? So it means that of course the roles of PM, DPM, and Gov Whip are largely going to be different, like same for the LO, DLO, and Op Whip. But the end goal is you're like protecting or going against one side of the motion. So there are various roles how you can do it and achieve that end goal, but that end goal of against or being for the particular motion remains same on both sides. Let's start with like Prime Minister. So it's introducing government case, and it's very important to note this that whatever arguments you think of, whatever your case is, needs to have this sort of introduction where what is the case about, where is this heading, what are the impacts within that, how are you going to achieve those impacts, and lastly, why are those impacts important and whatever that is. The way we divide it is that Prime Minister is primarily responsible for a couple of things. One, introducing the larger idea of your case, which means if your case has a lot of nuances, of course, you can't put everything up in the first speech. What first speech is responsible for is giving sort of a overview of what the argumentation is going to look like. Secondly, things like what is the world in which this argumentation will be applicable. And I think there are a lot of nuances I can cover as to what does like characterization mean, what does setup mean, what does frame mean. But I think the larger idea I want you all to understand is that the first speaker in government has to establish where this debate necessarily takes place. What is the larger idea of your side? What are the overview, like in terms of what are the analysis or points or impact that you want to achieve within your side, and the way you're going to go ahead and get there. And a couple of things here. I think introduction in this context does not only mean that, oh, we're going to give you headings of what we are going to talk about, and that's probably it. It's it's layering and framing the debate in a way where your impacts in second and third speech, or even at the end of your own speech, can actually land. Which means if I go and start my case by saying, oh, one, people will start becoming richer, proving that without giving me context as to why that's even required, why are people needing to get richer, why do they need money, is going to be irrelevant. Which means the first speaker, like particularly Prime Minister, has to introduce your case, explain what you're going to prove is even important, what does the current world look like, and frame it out. So give me an overview of what the world is and why your impacts then will be within this world and will probably benefit people within that world or benefit certain individuals or whatnot. So giving a brief idea of what the case looks like is going to be a role of the Prime Minister itself. Coming to DPM, right, within government case as well. I think first you're going to go ahead and rebut op case, which is going to come up in the leader of opposition. And I think, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'll probably cover LO as well here, just to give you a contextual idea of how the debate moves as well. Once PM is done and has introduced the government case and given you a larger overview of what government is going to push, what the world looks like, the LO has two roles. One, to rebuttal government arguments, which means after you've heard Prime Minister, you have a brief understanding of what gov case is going to look like. As the LO, there are a few things which, of course, your side disagrees with. This is the particular position where you go and respond to Prime Minister and explain what are the few things you disagree with and why are they legitimate disagreements. And this is important because I think in parliamentary debating and all across, responses and rebuttals can't simply be that, oh, this so and so thing was wrong. You have to go on and explain why that is necessarily wrong and why what you are now going to say is comparatively going to be better. So comparatives all across the like any speech is going to be important. But for LO, the first thing you do is go ahead and rebut government arguments which have come up in Prime Minister. And secondly, what I've already talked about in Prime Minister for a first speaker is to introduce your case. That's what you also do at LO, that you introduce your opposition case. So once you've responded to Gov, whatever has come at PM, whatever you agree with, whatever you disagree with, after that you're supposed to go and introduce the same idea of your case, what the world looks like, what is your overview of your case, and what's going to necessarily take place within your world for providing certain impacts in that round. Which means, just get this one idea, both speakers have to introduce the larger idea of their cases. That goes both ways, right? For both PM and LO. Because introducing is the first speaker's job, introducing the larger idea and the frame. But LO, because they go immediately after PM, also has to directly respond to the Prime Minister and whatever they disagree with. Which means you can't go on by explaining what your world looks like without explicitly also mentioning what are the things you disagree with Prime Minister. But second thing which is important here is, there's not going to be everything that you disagree with simply because you're on the opposition side. Which means, let's say Prime Minister frames and tells you that this is the current world, this is what the overview of this debate is. There might be certain things within that overview which you actually agree with on side opposition. But the way you're going to impact and prove certain things are going to be different under that same idea. And this is important. So which means, don't get swayed by the idea that I'm leader of opposition, which means I have to explicitly go ahead and rebut and refute anything coming from side government or PM. You have to go ahead and see what are the things which your case, which you have discussed in case prep, where are the differences within that, and why what you are saying is necessarily the better alternative or the most comparative idea of this debate. So go and compare those two things and introduce what your world and what your case is going to look like. I've explained like what this introduction can look like. I think we're also within future session going to tell you what are the smaller nuances within this framing, what are things like characterization called which are important to further substantiate your argument. But the larger idea is introduce the world in which this operates, in which the debate is happening. Who is this debate happening about? Like, who are the most important people within this debate? And how are you going to go ahead and benefit them or protect them from the harm which occur in the other side? That's the larger idea of giving an overview of your case. Coming to Deputy Prime Minister, which happens post Leader of Opposition. I think you all know the order by now. Note again that responses are something which you'll always have to do, except obviously in Prime Minister, because you're the first person going ahead and speaking. So you're introducing your side of the case without explicitly directly responding to any speaker before you. But post that, there are always going to be responses which need to be given to the other side. So when Deputy Prime Minister speaks after Leader of Opposition, your side has given your overview. You've heard what Leader of Opposition has given rebuttals for and what their overview is. Now at DPM, firstly, now your responsibility is that you have to go and rebut certain arguments which you don't think are necessarily valid or which you think are comparatively better on your side. So let's say you hear Leader of Opposition, they give a different frame or different setup for this motion. If you disagree with that, and if your case is opposite to that or probably is not in direct lines with that frame, you have to go ahead and rebut that same argumentation, and the same concept applies for rebuttal. They have to be beyond just saying that, oh, they're wrong. Prove why they're wrong, what is the analysis behind it, and why is your world comparatively better. Of course, you might be asking questions like, how do you even do that? Like, how do you respond to things by giving all this? That's something with substantial sessions will tell you in detail what is analysis, how do you impact things or whatnot. But the larger idea to get is what is the role of its speaker. So DPM has to go ahead and firstly respond to Leader of Opposition, and secondly, develop/evolve own team's case. And this is extremely important, right? Because as I do your first how that's going to necessarily operate, which means if in first speaker I've said that X thing is something which is going to happen, and we'll prove why there is a benefit within the current context I've given you. It's in Deputy Prime Minister when you can particularly now explain that how is this benefit going to happen. Let's say A, B, C thing is going to happen for this individual to get this benefit, which means evolving your case beyond an introduction and showing how do you achieve those certain things which you have explained you will be achieving in your side is something which happens in DPM. So things like analysis is something which is very heavy in second speeches. What does analysis mean? It's simply about analyzing certain extents of argument which you have like framed, right? Which means if you're going to say that, oh, two things. One, we provide monetary benefits in terms of direct money to individuals. But secondly, we're also going to prove to you why government structures are going to get better. If that's the larger idea of your argument, it's in Deputy Prime Minister when you have to now go ahead and explain how that takes place. And for analysis in both DPM and Deputy Leader of Opposition, there are a few basic questions you can keep in mind. how do we prove the how, what, when, and how of my argument? So if that the argument is people get more money, now you have to answer basic questions as how. How do they go and get it? What do they actually go and get? How often do they go and get it? Basic questions like these. So when you go and answer these questions, these come out in the form of analysis. Like how is this going to necessarily take place? This is how, one, two, three. So developing your case means basically going and analyzing things to achieve the impacts which you have in your, like, which you have set up within your own debate, and developing and like basing it on that. That's something which happens in Deputy Prime Minister. After responding to LO, you develop your own case which came in Prime Minister and go ahead and achieve those impacts which you had promised you're going to achieve. What is going to happen, how it's going to take place, analysis on that. That's the like idea of what you have to do in a deputy speech regardless. Now coming to Deputy Leader of Opposition, you go ahead and again, same rule applies. You go and rebut government arguments coming at Deputy Prime Minister. And one thing's important: it's not like at DLO you can't rebut anything which came from Prime Minister. You can only do it to DPM. That's not true. The idea is that at Deputy Leader of Opposition, you have to respond to whatever is the Gov claim till now, whatever PM and DPM has said, because of course they both are arguing for the same side. So it's not like you can only like rebut the specific thing which came in DPM. You can obviously do the same for the Prime Minister as well. But the larger idea is that you have to respond to the larger claim which has come from both speakers. Because one speaker has said X thing will happen, the deputy has explained how that will happen. So what you're responding to can of course be specific about any speech, but it can also be about the larger idea and why you disagree with that. So responding and rebutting does not always mean you're responding to only this one thing which they're arguing, or like one thing which they have explicitly said. It can be the larger idea as well, which means it's not restricted to one speech itself. But of course, whatever is coming Deputy Prime Minister is new to the debate. So you are the next speaker from that, which means you have the unique responsibility to respond particularly to what came in their speech and how their cases evolved and why you disagree with that. Once that response has been done, you also have, like the Deputy Prime Minister, have the burden to now evolve and develop your own opposition case as well. And this is where you have to get the idea, right? First speaker from both ends do have a common thing. They both have to introduce their own cases. PM introduces government case, LO introduces their opposition case. Similarly, both deputy speakers, Deputy Prime Minister and Deputy Leader of Opposition, do have the common burden of evolving arguments and taking it a step further. But of course, DLO has to first respond to DPM, DPM has to first respond to LO, and then take up the common idea. Which means both deputy speeches have the role of going ahead and analyzing and evolving your own team's case. I've briefly explained to you how do you do that by answering basic questions of analysis and how the necessary impacts can take place. Similar thing has to be done in Deputy Leader of Opposition as well. So you kind of get the idea that first and second speeches within that have common roles. It's just that the order in which you speak, you have to respond to the previous speaker before you get to your side of the argumentation and your side of the analysis as well. Now coming to government whip, which happens post Deputy Leader of Opposition. And this is where both whip speeches have now a unique role within this debate, which is not similar to deputy or the first speeches, right? In government whip, of course, the first thing is that you rebut opposition arguments which came in Deputy Leader of Opposition. And this is you probably get the idea now. You have to respond to your previous speaker, because the previous speaker than you was the speaker from their side, which means now they've taken it a step further and they've analyzed more things within their side. And it's now your responsibility to keep responding to them to ensure that their point does not necessarily stand. So at government whip as well, you have the responsibility to respond to Deputy Leader of Opposition and go ahead and do two more things. One, you have to defend your own arguments, in the sense that, of course, your arguments which you had established in first two speeches have now gotten a lot of responses from the other side. They've been tried to be tackled by. They've gone ahead and had a lot of responses, had a lot of counter argumentation, counter analysis. Now it's your responsibility to explain what really happened in the debate and why is that your arguments still stand in the debate, which means they're still true. Let's say I pushed an impact that people are going to get money. It was probably challenged by opposition by saying that no, it's not that people are going to get money, they're actually going to get poorer. At whip, now I have to come back and defend that with what analysis came from both sides, why is our push about people getting money still true? Why is that going to take place despite that the responses which came from the other side? That's the idea of how you defend your own arguments. But the second part of this, and this is the most crucial part, is that summarize slash weigh. And weighing is the primary responsibility of a whip. And this might be a new word and it's very difficult to understand what necessarily weighing means. It's not necessarily just summarizing what happened in the above speeches and that's it. You have to summarize it in a way where you have to prove why your side and your side's analysis is better than the other side's analysis. Now, there are few ways you can go ahead and weigh, but I think that's something which is going to be explicitly explained to you in different sessions as to what are the ways to go ahead and like do this weighing and compare both sides of argumentation and summarize. But I'll give you just a one or two example which might make it easy for you. For example, there are metrics to go and weigh. Something like likelihood, which means both sides argued a couple of things, right? We argue two benefits, they argue two benefits. Probably the one way you can prove why your arguments are still being defended in this debate or still relevant within the debate is by explaining that the analysis you gave for the argumentation is more likely to take place than what the other side explained. That's one of the metrics I'm giving you an example about, which means weighing is simple. You take both sides' arguments and you explain why your side's arguments are more relevant, more likely to accrue, or are more impactful. So it's taking both arguments and now comparing why your side's arguments are better than the other side. There are technical ways in terms of the metrics you use to go and compare that. I think that's something which you can go ahead and explain to you within WIP sessions specifically when we go and discuss that. What are weighing metrics? How do you do that? But the larger idea is you respond, you go and defend your own arguments, and you like compare both sides of the argument and explain why your side of the arguments are more relevant within that debate. That's the larger idea of comparison, not just summarizing, but actually comparing and weighing why your side is more relevant or more important. That's the larger idea in WIP. Similarly, for opposition whip, you go and rebut the thing whichever came in government whip through the same mechanism which I've already explained, and the same role applies. You have to defend opposition side of the arguments and go ahead and summarize and compare and go ahead and weigh why your side's arguments are more relevant to theirs. So there are, of course, common things which you have to do in speaker roles. Like third speakers do have to weigh both government whip and opposition whip. And of course, you have to respond to your previous speaker, as I've already explained. So weighing as a concept might still be a little complicated, but we're going to get like into detail. You're going to get a larger idea of how those things work and how you can actually weigh. Lastly, for both reply speeches, there are two things I'm going to say. One, I think there's something which you already touched upon in terms of in reply speeches, no new material can come forth, which means in both reply speeches, you can't go and say, I'm now going to respond to the previous whip speech. This is not like one of the constructive debates. At the end of opposition whip, 6 speeches have happened and they are constructive speeches. Constructive speeches mean that whatever material had to come and analysis had to come has already been established, weighing has been done. Now, in reply speeches, you can't add more things to that in terms of now responding more, giving more analysis or any of those sort. You have to give a biased adjudication. Now, here's what's important about this. What is the meaning of adjudication, right? We've already explained like adjudication is basically how the judge is going to go ahead and listen to both sides and going to explain why he thinks or she thinks one side won over the other, like or one side's arguments are more relevant or more likely or all those things than the other side, and that's why they win. When you're a government reply, you have to do the same thing, but explain whatever happened in the debate, why is your side winning the debate? And this is where reply speeches also get fun, because in the extent that you now have an opportunity to confidently explain why your team takes the debate with regards to whatever has happened in the debate. So think of it like this. You are also giving an adjudication. You're also explaining why your team won, but it's biased because you are saying that this is the reason why we won. So you have to do the same work which a judge does by, okay, this is the reason why one team wins. These are the reasons for it, but do it in a biased way by saying that's the reason why your side won. So you have to explain that this is the XY thing which happened in the debate, and here are a few reasons why our side takes this debate and wins this debate comparative to the other side. So it's giving the same idea of how a judge would probably judge the debate, but doing it in a biased way where you can explain why your team wins this debate. Similarly, for opposition reply, that both reply speeches have to go and say why their team wins the debate according to whatever has happened within the debate itself. That's the larger idea within reply speeches, which are biased adjudications at large. It still might be a little complicated to get the exact grasp of reply speeches. I think the more mocks you do, you're going to realize how reply speeches are like very, very different from constructive. But there are just two very important things I'm going to reiterate. One, no explicit new material in terms of responses or analysis can come in reply. It's not a constructive speech. So you can't add and now substantiate your case at all. Now you just have to explain what happened in the debate and why you are winning that debate. That how we responded, what are the things we did to take this debate over the other side comparatively. You're giving a judgment, but doing it in a biased way where you are trying to prove why your side won. That's the larger idea within reply speeches. So I explained to you what each speaker role necessarily does, why there are common thing between first speaker, common thing between second speakers, third speaker, and the reply speakers. But you have slightly different burdens in terms of going and responding to the previous speaker first and then going and doing your thing. That's a slight nuance within each side, of course, but the larger principles also remain same within each speaker role. Before going forward, I will like to open the floor for any doubts here because I know this was probably a lot of information to digest. If you can just understand the larger idea of what the role looks like, how you do that role is something which we'll explain in further sessions. What I just wanted to understand is what does this person has to do a role, I'll be happy to answer them. So you can put in the chat, raise your hands, whatever may be comfortable. We'll wait for a minute here before we can go to the other slide. Also, I'll like love if more cameras can be on. I see a couple of them on, but yeah. You can unmute yourself as well if you have a doubt at this point, if you want to, because we'd love to make it interactive as well. And if you've understood all speaker roles, that's also great. You can give me a reaction for me to understand that you've understood everything within the speaker role at least. And of course, this PPT will be available. So in case you read on it and you have further doubts, you can reach out to any one of us at any point in time beyond this as well, and we'll be happy to help out. But yeah, if in case there's anything you want me to repeat at this point. Cool. If there are going to be 4 speeches from each house, there is a chance that some points will be repeated again and again. So does it affect the team negatively? And if so, what could be done? Okay, so the point is this, right? I think the idea of repetition is that, again, this is where it's important. You are going against or going for the motion, which means you have a one burden. Let's say I have to oppose capitalism. So of course, I'm not going to repeat every time that I'm opposing capitalism, but the larger burden of my team is that I have to prove by end to start to end that why it's okay to like oppose capitalism, what are the problems within capitalism, and why there's an inherent need to oppose it because of the harms it creates. So it's not necessarily repeating, it's covering different aspects within that. The first speaker can go ahead and explain what does the current world look like, what are the effects of capitalism we can see today. The second speaker can go ahead and explain why is there like you to the end where you weigh why it's better to oppose capitalism than on the other side to be defending capitalism. So there are different ways you go and achieve the same impact. And insofar as you don't do all these things within your analysis and within your push, it can't necessarily stand. So it's not necessarily repeating, but it's more so about the fact that you're giving different things or different ways to prove the similar idea in the talk. That's the idea. So basically, the PM has to tell the current scenario of the world and explain why the world is better off with his side of the motion. So explaining why your side is better off is something which is like going to be done in all speeches. You're obviously, when you're going to respond and give analysis, you are proving the same thing why your world is better. What I mean by introducing the world, which means that, let's say we're talking about capitalism. Before going forward, I think there has to be something which both sides can agree on, or at least what you think they should. And hence, when we go and prove to you that there's a need to oppose capitalism, you can link it back to the idea that, okay, the reason why this works is because there are harms existing. For example, if I go ahead and just prove to you within first 2 speeches that if we oppose capitalism, this is the 2 things which are going to happen. My question will be, even if that happens, why is that important? Like, okay, why? Like, why is it necessary? If your proof is that if we oppose capitalism, equality will exist, I can ask you, why is equality even required? You didn't explain me that. So introducing the case also means setting the debate up in a way where you establish that this is the problem with the current world, this is what's needed, and then further you are the team which explains how you're going to get to those things which are needed in the first place. And this is where opposition might disagree with you. Opposition can say, no, equality is not needed insofar as a lot of people get capitalism. So even if we can't achieve perfect equality, there are larger benefits of capitalism. This is why we should not be opposing that. So there can be counter-introductory things to your idea as well. So proving why your world is better off is constantly done in all speeches. Just the larger idea of introducing what the world looks like is important to answer the question of why is your further points even relevant to the debate. That's why it's important to establish what are the benefits you're going to go ahead and explain. Perfect. We'll now move to the next slide. You can, like, if you have more questions, you can ask them later on as well, or reach out, post this if you have any further doubts later on. Perfect. Points of information. And cool. So if at any point in time you have probably gone ahead and seen any sort of conventional debates, if you've seen any sort of speeches or anything of that sort, you probably also must have seen the idea that in the middle of the person giving the speech, there are sometimes the opposition raises a particular question by raising their hand, and this person stops and answers that question, right? So points of information in simple is basically a question which the other side can ask you, and you can probably go ahead and answer that within your speech itself. I'm going to explain how that takes place within the 4-5 pointers we have. One, it's an interjection between a speaker's speech from the other team, and it's a good tool for engagement. Now note if, and this is where the last question becomes important, right? That everybody is now going and saying their side of the story, right? One, I think you also engage with responses, because whenever you respond to the other side, you're directly engaging with what they're saying. You're not just ignoring them and probably proving your thing, right? Because if both sides just continuously explaining their side of the story, without responding to the previous idea, that's not going to necessarily take place in the most fruitful manner. That's one sort of engagement. What you can do through POIs is you can ask the question when somebody is explaining a particular thing and directly engage with them at that point of time. So it's a good tool to go ahead and like engage and like engage with the other side's arguments as well. Second, it can be a question, clarification, or a direct refutation, right? So you can probably go ahead and like ask a POI in terms of a question that if you are saying this is true, why is that so? Considering that X thing also happens. It can also be a direct rebut. Like refutation is different, right? In terms of saying that okay, you are saying that X thing will happen, but if there are other aspects like Y and Z taking place, it's probably not going to happen. So engage with that. So you are probably raising a question on their analysis by putting a doubt that okay, you're saying this will happen, but it probably won't because of these XYZ reasons. So engage with that. Now that person now has to go ahead and respond to that. Is that saying okay, you have asked a question on my analysis, and this is my defense to it. So this is how constant engagement can keep happening between both sides. They can engage with each side of cases. Third, it can only be asked in the first 6 speeches between the first and the 6th minute of your speech. This is extremely important in the rules of a POI. It can't be asked in a reply speech. That's very, very important to understand. It can only be asked in the first, second, and third speeches between PM and LO, DPM, DLO, and both the whip speeches. So it can be asked by the other team to the other speaker in any of these 6 speeches, not in the reply speeches at all. And secondly, you have 7 minutes and 15 seconds to go ahead and give your speech. The zero, that means the starting point of your speech, till the end of the first minute, as well as the time from 6 minutes to the ending point of your speech, which is 7 minutes, 10 seconds, or 7 minutes, 15 seconds, are times where POIs cannot be asked. They are called protected times, which means, let's say I'm starting my speech. For the first 1 minute, you cannot ask me a POI. As well as for the last 1 minute and 15 seconds, you also can't ask a POI. Which means the only time when a POI can be asked within a speech is between the first and the 6th minute. So you have these 5 minutes in the speech to go ahead and ask a POI as the other team. You can't do it in the first 1 minute, and you can't do it in the last 1 minute and 15 seconds or so. That's the rule of asking a POI. Coming to the last 3 points. One, it should be concise and not longer than 15 seconds. A POI is not an opportunity for you to go ahead and like give more analysis or something at a larger scale for 30, 40 seconds. It has to be a very direct refutation or a question, and it has to be shorter than 15 seconds or 15 seconds at the maximum. It's you at no point of time can you go ahead and exceed 15 seconds in your POI, because if you're exceeding 15 seconds, you're biting into the time of the other speaker, which is inherently not a good thing to do. So make sure your POI is a direct question, direct refutation, and it should be within 15 seconds in total. Must be raised respectfully, and this is very important because oftentimes debates get heated up. Of course, both teams are trying their best to win, and you want to go and you think this analysis from there and doesn't make sense, and through the POI you want to like really push the idea that it doesn't make sense. You still have to do it in a very respectful manner where it's not looking like you're directly attacking the person or saying, oh, this is just nonsense. You can't do all those things. So POI has to be raised in a very calm manner and has to be done in a very respectful way, where you simply go and ask a question that this is what you say, but this is why it's untrue. Like answer that question, right? So it has to be respectful at all points of time. And this is very, very important because debates do get heated up, but you have to keep your cool and ask these POIs also in a way which is respectful to the other speaker, because they're also trying to put forth their arguments to the best of their abilities. So it's very important that these POIs are necessarily in a respectful way and they're asked to the best of abilities within that. Lastly, after you have offered a POI and it's been rejected by a speaker, a second POI cannot be offered within the next 15 seconds at least. What do you mean by this, right? Let's say I am speaking and this is the second or third minute of my speech. Dhruv asks a POI to me, or at least like raises a hand to ask a POI, and I see it and I say that, yeah, exactly. So within an online meet, if I can say I want to be asked POI through you raising your hand virtually, I'm giving my speech, Dhruv has raised his hand. I'm probably going to reject this POI saying, okay, I'm not going to take you now. I'll answer your question later on. Now, if I have rejected your point of information, you have to at least wait 15 to 30 seconds to ask another POI. Like 15 seconds is bare minimum, but of course 30 seconds is also something which is respectful. Because note like this, right? If you don't wait for 15 seconds, you can just constantly keep asking POIs and that person has to refute you again and again. It's very distracting for the speaker. So to maintain that respectfulness, it's important that once you ask the POI and the other person has responded by saying, I'll take you later, or it's a no at that point of time, you have to wait for 15 seconds before you can raise another POI. Because POI is a choice. It's not like if I raise my hand and say POI, Dhruv has to take it in his speech. He can go ahead and say that, no, I'll take you later. It's his choice when to take the POI. So you can probably also clarify before you start your speech that I'll be taking POIs maybe at 5 minutes, 30 seconds. I'll be taking it 5 minutes. And secondly, the way I want to take POIs is by, you can just raise your hand in the meet, or like if you're like in face-to-face, you can just say, please just raise your hand. don't say anything. Because a lot of times team will get up and say POI in the middle of your speech, which might be distracting for you. So clarify that the preferred mode that you want to take a POI is it just like raising your hands or standing up, or if you're okay with them interrupting you, that's also fine. But it's on the basis of what you tell them your preference is how the POI can be asked. But you have to wait 15 seconds if it had been rejected. That's the larger idea of POI, and it's very important that you do ask and engage with POIs to just make the debate engaging and constantly interact with the other side's case to make it comparative as well. So any doubts within POIs, how they're asked, what are the rules behind it, anything within this, you can go ahead and ask. Again, this all might be a lot of information, so it's totally fine if you have doubts. Don't go and hesitate that these are doubts which might just not be as useful, or that might be a weird doubt. Nothing is a weird doubt at all. So feel free to ask any doubts at all. Like, it's the first time you're hearing all this, it's totally understandable if it's a lot of new information to get grasp. And of course, you'll have the PPT, so reading it again and again post this also will be helpful to keep recalling whatever we're explaining right now. So any doubts in the PO, I think we'll wait for a minute. If not, then we can go ahead and Dhruv can take over. If you want to write in the chat or you want to unmute, both things work. Or if you're understood, you can also let me know if all of this is clear. Perfect. Also, you reacting is also a way for me to just see if you're actually in the meeting and not just sitting there and probably doing other things, which often do happen in online classes. But yeah, so I can see a lot of you reacting, so that's pretty good. Perfect. You just made 10-15 more seconds. Yeah. So if a person rejected twice and the second time he's raising his POS should be different or the same. Oh, okay. So okay, fair question. So let's say I have a question in mind, and Dhruv is giving a speech. Dhruv has said that I don't want to be verbally interrupted. To ask a POI, you can just raise your hand. That's it. So if he's giving a speech, I've raised my hand. The way he's rejecting my POI is not by first letting me speak and then saying I'm rejecting it. The idea of rejecting it is that he doesn't want to take my POI right now. He just wants to take it later on, which means I just don't ask the question I had in mind and I sit down. So the next time I ask that POI, it's still not been answered. So I can raise the same question which I had in mind to him. Of course, if I have gone ahead and asked a question and Dhruv has heard my POI, he's accepted the POI, but has failed to answer the question, I can potentially, when I ask another POI, if Dhruv is willing to take the second POI, I can ask the same question by saying, this is what is important. You haven't responded to that. So what's your answer to that? Two things again, it has to be respectful. It has to be in the context of rules within like 15 seconds. And by rejecting it means he's not taking my POI. So I have to ask him later on and not constantly push him at that point of time. So if speaker answers the POI, then follow-up questions are allowed. No. So this is also important. Let's say I ask a POI to Dhruv. Dhruv has responded and moved on within the speech. Now note, Dhruv has heard my POI for 15 seconds. He's now responding. I can't now go ahead and follow up this question with him. I only get one opportunity to ask that POI. After I've asked that POI, Dhruv answers whatever he wishes to. I can't have a follow-up to that. If I have another thing which I have in mind which I want to ask, I'll have to raise another separate POI after those 15 seconds or after some time. And if Dhruv accepts that, I can ask another question or a follow-up question. But there is no instant follow-up then. I ask a question, Dhruv responds and moves on with the rest of his speech. There is no follow-up question I can instantly ask. If I have a follow-up, it has to be raised to the same another POI. If Dhruv accepts, I ask him a question. Can the speaker decide at what time frame he can be interjected for POI? Absolutely. So what you can do is, maximum POI single person can ask. There is no rule to a maximum POIs. Usually I would recommend that you at least take one between your speech. But if you do think that you have the time to take maybe 2 or 3, you're more than welcome to. But usually I don't think you'll have the time to take more than 2 POIs. At least I have not seen people taking more than 2 POIs. In case you do wish to do so, it's allowed. There's no rule for it. But you will realize that the material you have most of the times, you only have time probably for 1 POI to the other side. Can the speaker decide? Yeah. So before giving your speech, you can clarify that I'll be taking POIs at 5 minutes, 30 seconds, or at 5 minutes, or at 4 minutes. So keep it ready and you can ask me then. You can also go ahead and say that don't raise your hands till that particular point of time, and then the team can raise as soon as it hits 5 o'clock or 4 minutes or 5 minutes, 30 seconds. Sometimes people don't really take the idea of time into consideration. They will just go ahead and ask you whenever. But what is very important is clarify the mode you want to be asked. So if you're very explicit, you don't want to be interrupted verbally in your speech, do explicitly say that if you want to ask a POI, just raise your hands. Don't say POI in the middle of my speech, and the other team has to oblige with those with those preferences with regards to POI. Does it happen that you ask for a POI and also block the arguments expected to come from the other side by just giving a justification of your own? It's all happening in those 15 seconds. So I mean, I don't want to get into too much detail on this question. The reason is that these are tactical ways of how you can ask a POI and what you can ask within a POI. The larger idea is you can ask a question with 15 seconds, the other person has to go ahead and respond. Of course, the tactical ways of you going ahead and like refuting the argument which you think is the most important or the one which is going on is up to you. But like again, I would just recommend don't do it in a way where you're constantly interrupting their argument because you know it's a good one to just interrupt their flow and ask a question there. But again, you can argue against what their analysis is ask it as a POI or a refutation, and they'll have to engage with that. But it has to be done within those 15 seconds allowed. Cool, that's largely done. To just save time, we'll have other doubts at the end of it. I'll now hand over the floor to Dhruv to continue this session.
Yeah, thank you, Sehaj. Can we move on to the next slide? All right, Madhav, I'll take just that one question. What if the speaker is not responding even if you're raising your hands? So whenever you raise your hand, a speaker can like tell you to put your hand down. So if the speaker has asked you to put your hand down, then you have to follow that and you have to put your hand down. What you can do next is wait for 15, 20, 25 seconds and then you can raise your hand again. But if the speaker has specifically said that they don't want to take a POI now, it's respectful and necessary for you to put your hand down and don't ask that POI. All right. Yeah, so I'll just move on with my slides. What we're going to start with now is case construction. Oh, before that, thank you to Pubili and Swastik for still keeping their camera on. If others can do that, please do it because it would make the session more interactive and fun. So yeah, I see 2 cameras abhi on. Eva dekh lo and just turn them on if possible for you. All right. Yeah, so just moving on with case construction. So case construction is like the fun part of the debate. It's what you do within the case prep. So whenever a motion is released, which is like a topic is released, case construction is about understanding the motion, what it demands from both the sides, and what you need to do within that motion. So there are certain guidelines that you need to follow within it. Number one, it's very, very important for you to read the motion correctly and understand what the motion is demanding out of you. Because if you're not correctly understanding what the motion is demanding out of you, the arguments that you would then be making can be irrelevant to the debate and it can cause you to lose the debate in general. So it's very, very important that whenever a motion is released and whenever you're debating, whether it be a tournament, whether it be a mock, that you're actually understanding whatever the motion is, what are the burdens within that motion. We'll also have a specific session as to what like motion burdens are, because there are certain kinds of topics, kinds of motions that you need to debate upon, and we will elaborate on that later as well. But like currently, just in general, it's important to understand what the motion is demanding from both sides. So this is like where it's important to understand that whenever you're defending a particular side, you cannot have everything, because there is always a trade-off that is existing. I'll just explain what a trade-off is. So a trade-off is for you to get something, you have to give up something. If I'm sitting here and taking this session, I probably cannot go ahead and watch the movie Jawan right at the same time. So the trade-off that I'm taking currently is I'm sitting here, you all are sitting here, but we cannot do other fun activities that we could have done regardless. If I'm eating chole bhature, I cannot eat dosa at the same time. So that is the kind of like what exactly trade-off means. It's you get something, but you have to give up something. Obviously, like if the like core adjudication panel, which is like the organizers of the tournament, if they're making a topic, if they're making a motion, they won't give you everything within the motion, because then the debate becomes pointless. So you get some things, the other side also gets some things. So it's important whenever you are understanding the motion, you try and understand what is the binary within the motion, what is demanded out of you, out of your side, what is demanded out of the other side. So it's also strategic to understand that you cannot claim every single argument. There are valid pushes that can come from the other side as well. You need to recognize your own valid pushes and tell me why your arguments, why your pushes are more important than the fair pushes of the other side. So it's also important to acknowledge if the other side has good arguments and then try either to rebut those arguments and outweigh those arguments, as Sehaj has already talked about. So this is like very, very important in just understanding the motion, in just understanding the trade-off in general. Secondly, logic. See, logic is the one of the most important things in this debate, like in a debate, because in parliamentary debating setting, facts don't win you anything, right? Because even when you are an adjudicator, you are judging it as an average reasonable person. You don't have specific expertise knowledge on anything. So even when you're debating, you don't have to give specific facts, because facts in general in isolation don't win you debates. What you can do is you can use facts with logic and try to push your argument forward. So if you're trying to bring a fact in isolation, it won't help increase the persuasiveness or the relevance of your argument, but it doesn't mean that you cannot bring facts at all in a debate. When you bring a fact, you just have to ensure that there is reasoning behind whatever fact you are bringing in. So logic should go synonymous with the facts that you're talking about. For example, if the fact that you're talking about is child sex ratio in India is decreasing, this in isolation does nothing. But why does it happen? It happens because people have patriarchal mindsets. It happens because people, like in traditional conservative areas, value boys over girls, or like value some kind of like gender over the other gender. So this is why it probably happens, and that's why like it's important to understand what the motion wants, and it's important to understand that facts in isolation don't win you debates. It's about understanding what in general everything is about and giving the reasoning for that. So another thing that is important whenever you're trying to bring out logic is you have to link that logic correctly. So for example, if I'm trying to put forward an argument, I cannot take logical leaps within that argument. I have to move from A, then I have to move to B, then I have to move to C. I cannot directly jump from A to C and claim the biggest impacts. For example, for me to prove that economies of scale exists, which is like I do something in a big capacity and I gain benefits out of it, I have to prove how can economies of scale even happen. Economies of scale happens when I have the capacity and the capital to ensure that I'm setting up more industries, when I'm setting up more services and more ability for manufacturing to take place. So economies of scale happens only when I have the money to make sure economies of scale happens. When economies of scale happens, that is where I'm able to lower down the cost. What happens logically after I lower down the cost? The customers probably are able to buy those goods at a cheaper rate. What happens when customers are able to buy those goods at cheaper rates? They are more happy. They are more happy in general, but they are in general satisfied with the amount of money that they have to spend in general. So for example, if I'm talking about economies of scale, I cannot directly jump by saying economies of scale happens, customers are satisfied. I have to prove why economies of scale means that goods and their prices will be lower down, why customers can then have access to those reduced prices, and then they become happy. So it's important for whenever you're trying to prove something, go from A to B, B to C, and then C to D. If you take a logical jump, the judge is just not able to credit your argument in general, and that's why like this becomes very, very important. We'll also take another session on structure of arguments and what structure you need to follow to prove an argument. But this in general like is just very important for what logic is and what logic means to begin with. Thirdly, principles. So principles and impacts are like the kinds of arguments that you can make. Principle means anything that holds value within the society. So what does the society value as like a moral judgment? For example, we as society value right to privacy. Right to privacy then becomes a principle. We as society value agency of people. We want to maximize the amount of choices people have. We as society value the dignity that people have. We believe that human beings have dignity and they deserve certain rights of autonomy, of privacy, of safety. Principles for like the purposes of this session, I'll try to separate principles and impacts currently, but principles and impacts can also be like interlinked with each other. But for like the convenience of this like specific session, let's separate principles and impacts. Principles are arguments that you can make regardless of impacts, which is to say impacts are something that are happening in the real world. Impacts are something that are happening like pragmatically, practically on ground. So for example, if in an economics debate, I'm lowering down the price of a good, that is a practical impact. If the customer is satisfied, that is a practical impact. If I'm able to feel happy, that is a practical impact because I feel better about myself. That is a pragmatic argument I'm talking about. So impacts are pragmatic arguments, practical arguments that you can make within a debate. They can range from anything and everything. It could be about you lowering down the prices of something. It could be you benefiting a particular class of society. It could be you lowering down discrimination and making lives and quality of life of people better. So these are pragmatic outcomes that you're trying to achieve for people. In principles, what you're trying to prioritize is the moral judgment and the value that it in and of itself holds. So we think privacy in general is important. We think agency in general is important because we as society value these traits and value these qualities, and we think these qualities are important. So whenever you're like trying to prove a principle, even though it can be linked with impacts, but for like this purpose, principles are something that are not dependent on like outcomes within the debate. You can prove to me why privacy is the most important thing, regardless of it having the best impacts, regardless of it being the most important thing in pragmatic sense, but it can still win you debates in general. I'll write a motion down here, like just so like I can explain this binary better. Yeah. I'm just putting down the motion. Yeah. So I've put down this motion, like we can use this to understand principles and impacts. Yeah. So this motion talks about that this house, as the government, supports the use of absolute surveillance during public health crisis. So, for example, when COVID is going on, when swine flu was going on, like we can have absolute surveillance. So that is something this motion is talking about. What you can try and argue in government in terms of impacts is something, for example, that when you have absolute surveillance, you're able to ensure that people and their quality of life is better because you can limit the spread of that disease. Because if you're absolutely able to survey every single person, you can probably survey people who have gotten that disease, and then you can like prevent that disease from spreading amongst the masses. So what government can do in this debate is pragmatically try and claim that whenever we are surveying something, we're able to ensure that the crisis doesn't get out of hand. We are able to protect lives of people, and that is why we are able to like use this surveillance in general. What can opposition argue here? So this is an impact that government can argue. Obviously, the arguments that I'm talking about, they might not be the best within the motion, but they're general arguments that you can forward within this debate. In opposition, what you can talk about? In opposition, you can talk about that even though it is about public health crisis and these lives are important, we think privacy in general of individuals and state violating that privacy as a principle is valid. So in opposition, even though you might not have a very direct impact that you're trying to claim or you're trying to prove, what you can still try and prove is why privacy as a principle, as something that we as human beings value, is like important in a normative sense, regardless of it having practical pragmatic outcomes. Even though you can probably try and prove some pragmatic outcomes out of this, because if people's privacy is maintained, they probably feel catharsis on themselves. They are probably happier with the state if their privacy is maintained. That is a pragmatic argument you can link to the principle. But in general, principles in isolation, you can also push within this debate. So then the clash within this debate can become about you trying to save more lives versus you harming like the life of people and the privacy of people, because absolute surveillance can probably look like anything. You taking like you probably like having more footage, like taking actual CCTV camera footage out of like people's lives, probably invading their privacy, emails, call logs, etc. So if it's absolute surveillance, it means your privacy is harmed to a very large extent. So then you can try to prove in a principle sense why privacy is very, very important for an individual and why we care about privacy in general. I'll just put another motion, like just to make the binary even more clear. Yeah. So this motion talks about that this house believes that developing countries should ease labor regulations in times of in times of economic crisis. So here probably what the government can try and argue is like this is impact that the government can probably argue is in times of economic crisis, probably the people who are affected the most and who probably lose their job the most are the working class or like the laborer class within that like particular workforce. So when you ease labor regulations, it ensures that more people are able to get that job, more people have sustenance within that job, and they are still employed in terms of economic crisis. So this is an impact that government can try and argue. Now what can like opposition try and run in this case? Opposition can try run a different impact. Opposition can try and run that, okay, we understand that in your side of the world probably more people have job, and like but what still matters is regulation. Why? Because it's the quality of job that is also important, because when you lesser the regulations, you danger the work environments of these employees. For example, if you're working in a factory, if you lesser the regulations, it means that the supervisor is able to exploit the employees, make the working conditions worse off, make them work for 12-14 hours in unsafe environments and circumstances, which means even if you have quantity of jobs, you don't have quality of jobs. quality of jobs. Notice how this is important to understand the binary in this debate. Obviously, in government, you cannot claim both. We have quantity and quality. You can try, but there's like a binary that exists that you need to focus on. In government, you have to focus on the fact that we might lose some of the things, but we get some other things in return. We get quantity of jobs. We at least ensure people are employed. Opposition, on the same hand, cannot like suddenly claim that we'll have many more opportunities or jobs in our side, because there's a trade-off that exists. They cannot claim everything. So they'll probably claim that we do, even if we might lose some amounts of jobs, at least like people's safety, people's privacy, at least that is protected. And when there is more regulations that is involved. So it's important to understand that in a debate, you cannot have everything. You need to be charitable in how you're debating, and you need to understand the trade-offs and the binaries within a motion. So like this is in general very, very important for you to like understand case construction when you're coming up with arguments, when you're coming up with what is the most important thing, what can win me the debates. Fifthly, consistency. So consistency is very, very important, because obviously, like as Sehaj also talked about speaker roles, there are 3 speakers on each side, which is to say 3 speakers are defending the same front. They're defending the similar kind of world. They're defending the similar kinds of arguments. Obviously, they have different roles. How they do it, that is still different. What they're doing is still different to a degree. But consistency means that you're not contradicting the speaker that went before you. So, for example, if I'm the deputy prime minister and Sehaj was the prime minister, if Sehaj has made a certain argument, I cannot directly oppose that argument or contradict that argument. Because if I contradict that argument, it reduces the persuasiveness of those arguments, and the judge is able to recognize that, and the judge is able to like harm or punish our case for that. So consistency is important in the sense that all the speakers that are speaking like within the debate who are from the same team, they need to not contradict each other. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to repeat each other or you have to say the same things. You can still say different things within the same motion and ensure that you're not contradicting each other. So DPM can still bring new rebuttals. They can still bring new mechanisms, new analysis, and to a degree new arguments as well. But what they have to ensure is that it doesn't undercut what the other speaker has said. So for example, if in prime minister I talk about the fact that this leads to increase in jobs, in deputy prime minister I cannot directly oppose it by saying it leads to decrease in jobs. Like I cannot like just take that argument and antithetical and like state something that is antithetical to what my prime minister was trying to prove. So it's important in understanding contradictions. Obviously, you can try and take the best case or the worst case scenarios of your side. So for example, when Sehaj tried to prove in prime minister that like jobs increase in our side of the world, in deputy prime minister you can try and take the worst case scenario that even if jobs don't increase, we still win that debate on some other metric. But you cannot oppose the metric that has been set by our previous speaker. So this is like, this distinction is important, and we'll like probably do this in later training sessions as well. Contradiction is you directly opposing it. You can take the worst case scenario by saying that even if you don't believe our argument and what we have said till now, but we still win on XXX metrics. But you cannot contradict, and you have to be consistent in whatever you're portraying as the prime minister, deputy prime minister, and the government whip in general. There should be like coherence in what you are saying, and you shouldn't oppose your own arguments, your own case, because it just undercuts whatever you were talking about in general. Yeah. Any questions till now? Happy to take any. Yeah, I'll just wait for 1 minute. If you don't have any questions, वो भी लिख दो एक बार या बता दो, like just to be safe कि अभी सब सुन रहे हैं, because I know time हो गया काफी. I want to ensure कि सब अच्छे से cover हो जाए, but जल्दी भी हो जाए थोड़ा. Yeah, Aryan. Any questions? Okay, so I'm assuming you did it because you didn't have any questions, like just to show you were there. Okay. Acha, okay. If the previous speaker had said something wrong, then also the next speaker cannot. All right. So this is an interesting circumstance. So what you can try and do is, if the previous speaker explicitly stated something wrong, you can probably try in your next speech try and clear that this is not what the speaker meant. It in the sense ki, all right. So what you should do in this case is, first of all, you can still take the worst case scenario, which is to say you can still try like even if what the speaker had said wasn't true or was true, you can still take the worst case or the best case scenarios, which is even if arguments you can still put forward regardless of what your speaker had said. Or you can try and clear up the miscommunication that had happened, that this is not what we meant, opposition is trying to skew our case, this is not what our inherent case is, this is not what my speaker meant, they are trying to manipulate, and like they're trying to manipulate our arguments into something. Obviously this is not an ideal situation if our POI is also considered for evaluation. All right. So POIs in general are important for evaluation. So Abhi, currently we're talking about Asian parliamentary debating. There is also another format, British parliamentary debating. We'll also take another session on that. So POI's importance in specifically British parliamentary debating, we haven't discussed that format yet, is a lot more, but it's still but it still exists in Asian parliamentary debates as well. So POIs are important in general, like even in Asian parliamentary debates, for you to understand how like engagement has happened. So for example, if opposition whip, even like within Asian parliamentary setup, is stating something, and that is the last constructive speech, if you're able to in a POI efficiently prove your own point, that is something that the judge can still consider. So judges can take into evaluation what was the POI asked, whether the other side was able to answer that POI in general, and that is something that the judges can take into account like whenever they are deciding. And if it is like a very very close call, if it is like a very 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 close call, they can like try and see what the engagement was within this, how the POI was answered, what the POI was. And specifically like within the British parliamentary setup, POIs become a lot more important because there are four sides within that setup, and I won't go into too much detail, but in British parliamentary setup, POIs become even like a lot more important, and they can even change the calls that can happen and the verdicts that can happen. In Asian parliamentary debates, they are still important, but not to the degree that they are in like British parliamentary setup. Yeah. Can we can't we can't say that was a dumb argument, right? Considering we are allowed to curse, but we can't berate someone directly. Yeah. So like this goes for everyone. Whenever you are like rebutting something, whenever you're stating a point, you have to be respectful to the other side. You have to attack the case, not the person. Because so for example, you can say the case has inconsistencies, but not the person who is making the case like is not smart or is dumb in general. So you cannot attack a person directly because it's obviously very very disrespectful, and if someone else said something like that to you, and it could obviously hurt you as well. So it's important that whenever you are trying to rebut something, you have to attack their case, their content, but not them as a person, because them as a person is something that you cannot do. There are also like equity committees within a tournament. So for example, like a complaints committee, for example, if you do something like that, a person can reach to the equity committee and make a complaint against you if they have valid grounds as well. So there are mechanisms like complaints committee which you can approach in case someone violates that. And it's also like very important for you as a representative of our society as well. So when you're representing, like you're going in tournaments, you're not just representing yourself, you're representing the society. So it's important for you to be very very respectful to other people, like even if those people like particularly are not respectful to you, you can let your seniors know, you can go to the equity committee yourself, but you don't have to resort to their ground, and like you don't have to be like disrespectful to them even if they're disrespectful to you. You can obviously take certain actions against those people. You can reach out to your seniors, you can reach to the equity committee, which is the complaints committee that exists within a tournament. There are like communication mechanisms for that, but you cannot like be disrespectful or like berate the other person as well. Yeah. Can we rebut the reply given to a POI, or is rebutting supposed to stick to just the peaches? Can we rebut the reply given to a POI? All right. So, for example, you asked a POI to deputy leader of opposition. The deputy leader of opposition answered that POI. When you come up in government whip, you can obviously rebut the answer that they give, and that is how like the flow of rebuttals happen. So, for example, when leader of opposition comes, leader of opposition can rebut prime minister. DPM can rebut a leader of opposition. DLO can not just rebut deputy prime minister. Deputy leader of opposition can also rebut prime minister and their points as well. So it's not that you can only just rebut their direct speeches. If they're also responding to POIs and like what you have asked within a POI, if they're also responding to that within their speeches, you can also rebut their answer to your POI. So there is like a flow of communication and evolution of communication that happens. So you're not restricted, like whenever you're like rebutting something, you're not restricted to just rebutting their like general case. You can rebut their response to your POI as well if you think that's like very very important in this. Hopefully like that clears all the doubts. All right, yeah, I think we'll move on to the next speech if there are anything else we'll take at the end. Yeah. Next slide pe chal lete hain, let's go. All right. So this is about how do tournaments function in general, because obviously after you like all of your training sessions are done, after all of your mocks are done, you obviously want to go to tournaments. So firstly, like there are two types of tournaments that generally happen. These are like offline tournaments and online tournaments. So for offline tournaments, like there is a whole season where like in each DU college there's like a tournament that happens, and this happens every weekend. And for like a particular season, for like a particular sect, this is generally something that happens. Online tournaments keep on happening regularly in different countries. Those are something that you can also access through our society as well. So in general, a tournament lasts for 3 days. Obviously, there are other types of tournaments. A tournament can be like a 2-day tournament, like a 4-day tournament. But in general, a particular tournament lasts for 3 days. And it like in a general convention sense, it happens from Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Because obviously weekend is the time when everyone is the most free. And that is where like tournaments want to weaponize and get the most amount of debaters within their tournament as well. So they want to ensure that by having these tournaments on weekends, so like the convention that is generally followed is Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Because in Monday you have like the out rounds, the semi-finals, the finals, and like that is something that can be accessed on Monday as well. So this is like the general sense in which it is followed. So like I'll just explain the structure of these tournaments. So the structure of these tournaments is kind of like if you have watched Indian Premier League or if you have watched FIFA World Cup, there are certain preliminary rounds, there are certain out rounds. So for example, in general tournaments, there are like 5 rounds that you have to like debate in. These are rounds you debate in regardless of you losing. For example, if you lose the first round, you still debate within the second round. If you lose the second round, you can still debate within the third round. So there are preliminary rounds which all debaters and all adjudicators take part in, regardless of their performance of them losing a round or winning a round. So what generally happens is after the 5 rounds, a top certain percentage of the team moves to the out rounds. So it could be top 25%, top 20%, top 30%. It depends on like what the organizers want out of that tournament. So in general, for example, if there are five rounds within that tournament, there would be only a few teams that go on exactly 5 points, right? So for you as a team to win all 5 of your debates is like very, very rare. So there are many teams that also go within out rounds who have won 4 rounds. There are some teams that go to out rounds who have also won 3 rounds. So it's not necessary for you to like win every round and win every single debate. And that's like something which is important. You can lose a particular round. And that's how it's like growth happens obviously within the debate. So in general, a tournament gives you ample amount of opportunities for you to like proceed forward, regardless of you winning, regardless of you losing like a particular round. So in a preliminary stage debate, every debater, every adjudicator takes part regardless of the result. What happens after that? There are out rounds, like elimination rounds. So this is where when you lose a debate, you cannot proceed to further rounds. So after like the 5 rounds are done, probably they're like, let's for example assume that this is a quarterfinals tournament. So top 8 teams would go within that tournament, right? When it's a quarterfinals debate. So in general, what happens within this is you have 3 out rounds. You have quarterfinals, you have semifinals, and you have finals. It's written that this is elimination rounds is because if you lose quarterfinals, obviously you cannot go to the semifinals. If you're losing semifinals, you cannot go to the finals because on an elimination basis, you want to reduce the amount of people who are going towards the championship. So if in quarterfinals, for example, there are 8 teams, 4 out of them win, 4 out of them lose. The winning teams go to the semifinals. 4 teams go to semifinals, 4 teams lose, and like they're out of this tournament. In semifinals, out of these 4 teams, 2 teams proceed to finals, and 2 teams are kicked out of the tournament. So 2 teams then go on to the finals and like they debate and spar with each other for like winning and like just getting that championship in general. So there are 2 types of rounds, like just to summarize: preliminary rounds where everyone participates, out rounds where only certain top percentage of the teams are breaking. Like it depends on what the policy like they're following. It also depends on the speaker scores that you're getting. Not to go into too much detail because you'll get that in like other workshops as well, is like whenever you're debating, obviously you get certain scores like in terms of the judges assessing your performance. So these scores determine the amount of like total scores that you have. So if both teams, for example, are on 4 points, obviously if 2 teams are on 4 points, you need to decide which team goes forward on those 4 points. So then you use other metrics to decide, probably their speaker scores, etc., and which is more, which is less. So that's like the metrics that you can then use to decide. Speaker scores are the scores that judges give you. They follow a scale and they give you those scores. So if obviously higher the score, the better your performance, the better chances of you going in. So in general, it's like top 25, top 30%. Another thing which is important here is whenever like a debate tournament is going on, it's not just that the debaters are competing with each other, it's also that the adjudicators are also competing with each other. So for example, so like this is like where it gets important. For example, when a judge gives you a verdict, obviously Vrinda also explained like oral adjudication and them explaining their verdict. What happens after that is you as a debater, you as a team scores that judge on a like a 1 to 10 basis. So if you think that their judgment was satisfactory, you give them like a high score. If you don't think this judgment was satisfactory, you give them a low score. Obviously you don't have to be like, if you don't have to be like angry of you losing a particular round and just like down mark the judges. You have to be respectful and actually understand. For example, even when you lose a round, the decision can actually be correct a lot of the times, because the judges are like people who have been judging in general for a long period of time, if they're like cheering your room. So it's important for you to not get pissed off and angry and just downmark the judges, because the judges are also competing with each other. So if you downmark a judge, there are chances that that like particular judge doesn't go to the out rounds, and even though you are kicked out, the judge also gets kicked out with you, and so like it becomes a lose-lose situation. So you have to ensure that the score you are giving is also satisfactory and is also like in coherence with what their judgment was. Another thing to note here is, well, I think I can cover this here as well, is obviously the score goes from 1 to 10. So it's not that the judge has to give an outstanding OA for the judge to get a 10. The 10, like a 10 is a particularly achievable score. So if it is satisfactory, if you think everything was covered within the debate, you can give high scores to judges and you can expect high scores in return, like, because like this happens in good faith basis. If you're giving a good speech, ideally a judge should give you good scores. If the judge gives good judgment, you should give them good like feedback and good scores as well. So this happens on a good faith basis, and you have to ensure that like it's not you getting pissed off and like you down marking those judges. You have to ensure that you're not disrespectful, and even when you're asking that questions, you're not repeatedly heckle the judge. You can only ask like particular 2 or 3 questions at max, because the judges also have to go, and in general like this is important. So even when you're asking questions to the judges after their verdict, just ensure that you're not continuously asking the same thing and you're actually listening to them, and you're not heckling the judge ki please mujhe ye bolo ye bhi bolo ye bhi bolo. You cannot overrun the judge, and that's something that's also yeah, very very important. So just in brief, a tournament usually lasts for 3 days. There are preliminary rounds, there are out rounds. In out rounds it is elimination basis. Like every round certain teams get cut out, quarters, semis, finals, and then only one team like comes out as the winner, which is like the champion team. I don't think there's anything left within this. Any questions? Any questions in regards to tournaments? They like tournaments, like probably you don't like know what these mean, what these are. So obviously whenever you all go out to tournaments as well, we would obviously take a tournament briefing with you a session before that, explaining everything to you, what is required out of you before you are going to a tournament in general, so you know what to expect within a tournament, because a tournament is a new experience for you when you start going to these offline tournaments. All right. When will the first tournament be held? So the current focus is on training sessions. So after all the training sessions are completed, after like the mocks have been started, after you have started with like practices as well, then as soon as mocks begin, as soon as training sessions are over, we obviously want to send like you all to tournaments as soon as possible, but we also want to ensure that there are certain training sessions that you have taken in, certain practices that you have attended, for us to ensure that the experience is also good for you, the experience is also enriching for you, and the experience is not overwhelming for you because you weren't ready for that tournament. So as soon as all the training sessions are over, all the mocks are over, that is when you can expect like your batch to go to these tournaments. So obviously we want to ensure that training sessions get over within this month only, and we want to like start with mocks in like the latter part of this month as well. So this is something like in brief, which is like something we want to do. And as soon as everything is started, as soon as mocks begin, we want to send teams as soon as possible. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, I think we can move on to the next slide as well. So thank you everyone for coming. The session has ended. If you have any particular questions, you can reach back, you can unmute yourself, and you can write your question in the chat box. I think some of the questions like that were asked before might have been missed because of the time delay. So if you could like just write your question again if you had written it before, and I can like answer that question right now. So yeah. We can wait for some time just to ensure. You can also unmute yourself if you have any doubts, any questions. I hope everything was very clear. This activity is very, very fun, and I want all of you to attend every single training session, because these training sessions are very, very important. They become your gateway for the experiences that you want in offline tournaments. So if you attend these training sessions carefully, if you attend the mocks carefully, that opens you up as a person to a lot of opportunities within the circuit, for you to attend offline tournaments, for you to make friends in other colleges. So for me as a third year debater, I have friends in all colleges. I know like people in North Campus, I know people in West Bengal, I know people in South India as well. So, and internationally as well, I know many people. So like this is your gateway to open up your opportunities and open up your spectrum of knowledge and expand your identity. So take these training sessions very, very seriously, because this will ensure and this can translate into you performing well and you being happy with your performance, which is even more important. Obviously, like the ride for every single person is different. Some people might get early success, some people might get late success, but it's not about that. You have to like stick with this activity. You have to ensure that it's not about the verdict which determines your incentive or motivation. It's about the fact that you have learned something out of your losses. So losses are fine, even if you don't win tournaments, even if you don't break at tournaments. So for example, even within our batch, like there are many tournaments that we didn't break at, and like there are certain instances of that. So what we did is we came back to our seniors and we ranted and we got angry, but our seniors took care of us even within those harsh times and even within the best times. So it's important that regardless of the outcome of the debate, you still have an incentive to debate and learn and just grow as a person. So that becomes very, very important. Yeah. So if any one of your questions was missed, which was asked earlier due to a time delay, you can like just write your question again and I can take it. If there is anything left.
Am I audible?
Yeah, yeah.
So also just to let you know that you will be we will provide you with this particular PDF, and we recommend that you go through this again and again so as to be very sure and clear about the like parliamentary debating stuff.
All right. So I don't think like many people have many questions. So if you don't have any questions particularly and everything is clear, like you can like start leaving. The meet is over, the session is over. We're just informally interacting now. Yep.
Thank you so much everyone for
Thank
joining.
you so much everyone for joining. Thank you so much for taking the time out. We expect you to come in the next session as well. So ensure that too. These are very, very important for your growth. Yeah, I'll just wait for some time if there are any questions. Yeah. Yeah, Publi, did you want to say something? Actually, you're not audible for me.
No, I just wanted to say.
I'm not sure if like it's my side or if it's lagging for everyone.
Am I
No,
audible now?
yes, you are now.
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. It was really nice to listen to what APD actually is today.
Yeah.
We saw it through your mock debate and we understood a lot many things that day. But it was great to revise like what we saw as per the slides. It was a good presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so we wanted you to practically see it and theoretically understand as well. So for you to get
Yeah, yeah.
complete understanding, because obviously you all will be debating in mocks as well. You all will be giving speeches, which is obviously going to be a new experience for many of you. So just to ensure that it happens smoothly, we wanted to conduct this. Like, yeah,
Thank you.
no worries, no worries. Thank you so much, everyone.